There is a thought you've probably had at least once, late at night or in the middle of a church service that left you hollow, a thought you haven't said out loud to anyone because saying it feels like surrender. What if the problem isn't only out there? Not the political problem, not the cultural problem, not what's happening in the schools or the churches or the country at large. Those are real. You're not wrong about any of it. But underneath all of it, underneath the frustration and the grief and the years of watching things come undone, there is this quieter, more unsettling question. What if some of the disorder begins here? In me? Most people dismiss that thought as soon as it surfaces. It's easier to focus on the exterior, the elections, the institutions, the people in power making the wrong decisions. That's not dishonest. It's just incomplete. And a man named Russell Kirk told you exactly why, 70 years before you felt it. This video is not going to make the crisis smaller. It's going to make it more precisely located. And that is the only kind of clarity that leads anywhere real. Kirk published The Conservative Mind in 1953. He was 34 years old, teaching at Michigan State, living out of a rented room, and writing what would become the foundational text of the American conservative intellectual tradition. The book went through 7 editions. William F. Buckley called it the work that made modern conservatism intellectually possible. But the argument that matters for this conversation isn't the one people usually quote. It isn't about party platforms or legislative agendas. It's the first thing Kirk says, the first of what he called his canons of conservative thought. He opens with this: belief in a transcendent order, a body of natural law that rules society as well as conscience. Society as well as conscience. Not society instead of conscience. Not society and, separately, conscience. The order that governs the republic and the order that governs the soul are not two different things managed by two different departments. They are the same order, operating at two different scales. What happens in one eventually shows up in the other. Kirk wasn't making a religious point, or not only a religious point. He was making a structural argument. He was saying that the outer arrangement of a civilization is always, eventually, the downstream expression of its inner arrangement. Political order is downstream of interior order. The republic reflects the souls it is built from. That claim sounds almost obvious when you say it slowly. But sit with what it means. If it's true, then the disorder you see out there, the fractures, the loss of shared meaning, the institutions that no longer hold, is not primarily a political failure. It is a spiritual and interior failure that has moved, over time, into the political space. The politics is the symptom. The soul is where the disease begins. Kirk wrote that in 1953. Most people are only now beginning to feel what he already understood. A year later, in a program for conservatives, Kirk extended the argument. He distinguished between two kinds of people, not by party, not by class, but by the question of who governs them. There is the person governed by appetite, by the immediate, the comfortable, the path of least resistance. And there is the person who has achieved, through effort and habit and submission to something beyond themselves, what Kirk called inner order, self-governance, the ability to say no to what they want and yes to what they owe. His argument was precise. A republic of the ungoverned cannot survive. Not because ungoverned people will eventually elect the wrong candidates, though they will, but because the republic is not, at its foundation, a set of laws and institutions. It is a set of habits, dispositions, and moral convictions held by the people who live inside it. When those habits decay in enough individuals, the institutions that depend on them begin to hollow out, not all at once, slowly. The way a house with a rotting foundation looks perfectly fine from the outside until one morning it doesn't. You have been watching the hollow for decades. You may have thought it was a failure of leadership or policy or courage in the people elected to hold the line. Those failures are real. But Kirk's argument is that they are not the root, they are the fruit. The root is the ungoverned soul, multiplied over generations into a civilization that can no longer govern itself because it has forgotten how to govern anything smaller. This is not a comfortable argument. It is meant to be uncomfortable. Kirk was not writing consolation. He was writing a diagnosis. Here is the part that most people miss, and it is the part that should stop you for a moment. Kirk made this argument in 1953. 13 years later, a sociologist named Philip Rieff published a book called The Triumph of the Therapeutic. Rieff's argument was the mirror image of Kirk's. He said that American culture was undergoing a fundamental shift in its understanding of the self. The old model, what Reef called the religious man, was being replaced by a new one, a psychological man, whose primary concern was not duty, salvation, or self-governance, but well-being. Comfort. The management of inner states. Feeling okay. By 1966, when Reef's book appeared, the therapeutic idiom was already beginning its long colonization of American life. The churches, the schools, the family, the vocabulary of politics itself. The dominant story of the next 6 decades would be a story about the self, as a site of feelings to be managed, not a soul to be ordered. The crisis, in this new telling, was always located outside, in bad systems, bad structures, bad people who made you feel the way you feel. The prescription was always, fix the exterior and the interior will follow. That is the story the viewer, you, has been living inside for most of your adult life. Not because you chose it, because it was the water. It was the assumption so total that it was invisible. And here is what makes Kirk's timing remarkable. He diagnosed the counter-argument before the dominant narrative had even fully formed. He saw, in 1953, that the trajectory of American culture was toward the externalization of all moral and spiritual problems, toward making the self a passive recipient of exterior conditions rather than an active agent of interior ordering. And he said, before the therapeutic revolution had crested, no, it begins in the soul, it always has. It always will. This is why, when you have spent years watching the exterior fight, the elections, the culture wars, the arguments about what the schools are teaching, and arrived at the end of those years feeling somehow less resolved than when you started, you were not failing at conservatism. You may be experiencing, at a personal level, the precise dynamic Kirk predicted. The exterior battle, waged without interior order, produces motion without transformation. You may be asking, reasonably, what it actually looks like to do something about this. And the honest answer is that there is no short version. Understanding the diagnosis is not the same as beginning the cure. Kirk's argument gives you the name for what's happening. It does not, by itself, give you the daily practice of reordering. If you want that, the translation of this framework into something you can actually live, 30 days at a time, there is a workbook in the description below. It's called Order Your Soul First. 1 page a day. 1 Kirk concept per day. A reflection question and a concrete practice. Not a lecture. Not a course. The work itself, and the only place the work actually happens. The link is there when you're ready. In 1964, Russell Kirk did something that surprised even his closest readers. After more than a decade of writing about transcendent order, about the moral law that rules conscience as well as society, about the soul as the foundation of civilization, he converted to Roman Catholicism. He was 45 years old, he had no social incentive to convert, he was already a celebrated intellectual. The Catholic Church in 1964 was not a prestigious address. It was, for most of his readers, a complicated one. He converted because the logic of his own thinking had led him there. A man who spent a decade arguing that interior order precedes exterior order eventually submitted his own interior to a discipline beyond himself. The argument became a life. That same year, he married Annette Courtemanche. They settled at Mecosta, Michigan. Piety Hill, the house his family had owned for generations, filled now with books salvaged from demolished libraries, with students and wanderers and refugees who needed a place of order in a disordered time. They had 4 daughters. He wrote there for 3 more decades. The life at Piety Hill was not a retreat from the crisis. It was a response to it, and Kirk's response was to build something ordered. A home, a marriage, a library, a place where the permanent things were practiced, not just argued. A small civilization, built on an ordered soul, making its case by existing. He was not waiting for Washington to fix the culture. He understood, with a clarity that most of his contemporaries lacked, that Washington does not fix cultures. Cultures fix Washington, or they don't. And the fixing, when it happens, flows from the souls of the people who constitute the culture. Now here is the turn you may not have seen coming. You have been watching the exterior disorder for years. The fractures in the church, the family, the country, and the instinct, reasonable and understandable, has been to look for the exterior fix. The right leader, the right law, the right movement. And each time, the fix has been partial, temporary, or illusory. The hollow, remains. Kirk's argument, the argument he made in 1953 and spent the rest of his life living, is that this is not a failure of strategy. It is a failure of location. You have been looking for the solution in the wrong place. The soul is not a private compartment, separate from the republic, where you go to rest after the real work of politics. The soul is the republic at its foundation. What is ordered in enough souls eventually orders the world those souls inhabit. What is disordered in enough souls eventually disorders it. This is not metaphor. This is the structural claim Kirk staked his entire intellectual life on, and that 70 years of evidence have not refuted. This means something that is simultaneously alarming and liberating. The most consequential thing you can do for the civilization you are grieving is not cast a better vote, or win a better argument, or find a better candidate. It is to order your own soul, to take seriously, in the specific hours of your specific days, the question of what governs you, to submit, as Kirk eventually submitted, to a discipline that reaches past appetite and preference, and the management of feelings into something older and more demanding. This is not a retreat from the crisis. This is the only viable advance inside it. The soul before the republic. Kirk said it in 1953. He lived it at Piety Hill for the next 40 years. And the reason it still matters in 2026, the reason it matters specifically to you, watching this, carrying what you carry, is that the alternative has been tried thoroughly, and you are living in its results. The grief you came in with is real. It is not nostalgia. It is not sentimentality. It is not the complaint of someone who simply preferred the past to the present. It is the perception, accurate and serious, that something has been lost, and that the loss runs deeper than any election or any institution can reach. Kirk would tell you, you are right about the depth. You may have been wrong about the location. The thing that was lost was not first a policy or a party or a leader. It was an interior ordering, a habit of self-governance, a submission to something beyond appetite that made the exterior arrangements possible. When it goes in enough souls, it goes in the culture. When it is rebuilt in enough souls, the culture has somewhere to stand. That is a harder truth than anything partisan media will give you. It demands more than outrage or allegiance. It demands something that begins in you, in the specific, unremarkable hours of your ordinary days, and asks whether you are governed or ungoverned, ordered or disordered, building something or simply watching things come apart. Kirk built Piety Hill, 4 daughters, a library of rescued books, a home where the permanent things were practiced. You don't need his house. You need his answer to the question. Where does it begin? It begins here. It always did. Before you go, tell me the one thing you have been trying to say for 30 years and couldn't find the words for. Not to me. To yourself. Leave it below.